All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're exploring a seriously profound fable that reveals exactly why comparing ourselves to others is just a guaranteed path to personal misery. I mean, we all do it, right? We're scrolling through our feeds, we look at our neighbors, or we watch our colleagues, and we just kind of think, wow, they have it all figured out. But today, we're going to use a surprisingly powerful story from our source material to literally break down the mechanics of comparison. We're going to see exactly why it inevitably steals our joy.
So I want you to start by asking yourself this one question. Who do you consider the happiest person in the world? Seriously, take a second and honestly think about it. Is it some famous actor, a billionaire? Maybe that one friend who just seems to be traveling constantly? Now, think about why you believe that's true. Usually, it's because they have something you currently don't. Wealth, beauty, freedom, or status. Well, keep that person in the back of your mind, because our source material actually tackles this exact assumption through this ancient and honestly eye-opening story. Our story kicks off with this incredibly simple but totally loaded statement. Let's introduce our protagonist, a deeply, deeply miserable crow. As the fable goes, this crow was so unhappy with his life that one day he was just sitting up in a tree, openly crying. And right below him sat this wise monk in deep meditation. Well, the crow was weeping so hard that a single tear fell straight down and landed right smack on the monk's cheek. The monk looks up, sees this crying bird, and asks him, what's wrong? Okay, let's move into section 1, the burden of comparison. Let's see how this builds our understanding of human insecurity through the crow's absolute despair. This part brilliantly illustrates the heavy psychological burden of feeling inadequate. When the monk asks the crow why he's crying, the bird literally lists out all the reasons he believes his existence is just completely worthless. He feels unloved, he complains that people are constantly shooing him away in disgrace, nobody ever offers him food, and he just feels like everyone hates him. I mean, his misery has compounded so much that he flat out tells the monk that death would actually be better than living this life.
Obviously, the monk's heart is just filled with compassion hearing all this, so he offers the crow this classic piece of advice. We should learn to be happy in whatever condition we are in. But, as is usually the case with abstract wisdom, right, the miserable crow just doesn't get it. He just keeps crying. So, realizing words aren't going to cut it, the monk offers him a magical transformation. Using a special mantra, he promises to turn the crow into literally anything he wants. The crow instantly shouts that he wants to become a majestic swan. The monk says, okay, but with one catch. Before the transformation, the crow has to go find a swan and ask if it is truly happy. And that brings us to section 2, the illusion of greener grass. Let's follow the crow on this little quest and look at that universal trap of assuming everyone else has it much better than we do. Now, this journey perfectly visualizes that endless treadmill of wanting more. The crow starts out thinking the swan is the absolute pinnacle of happiness. But as we're going to see, this just sparks a total chain reaction of upward comparison. He goes from the swan to the parrot and eventually all the way to the peacock, just constantly chasing this higher, more perfect standard of living. And honestly, it flawlessly maps to how we behave today. It's exactly like when we look at people a few steps ahead of us in life, maybe on social media, only to eventually realize that they're busy obsessing over the people a few steps ahead of them. So let's look at the very first stop on his journey. The crow finds this swan swimming peacefully in a pond, and the crow's expectation is just total awe. He tells the swan, wow, you are as white as milk, everyone loves you, you must absolutely be the happiest bird in the world. But the swan's reality? Completely drastically different. The swan looks at him and says, no, my friend, I am not happy. Why? Well, because the swan feels completely plain. He looks around the world, sees all these vibrant colors, and genuinely feels that being white is essentially just being colorless and boring. In fact, the swan reveals he spends all his time envying the bright, super colorful parrot. So naturally, the crow flies off to find the parrot. But once again, there is a massive mismatch between expectation and reality. The crow goes on and on about how incredibly beautiful and colorful the parrot is, assuming that surely this guy is the happiest. But the parrot immediately shuts it down. It turns out, the very desirable traits that make the parrot so colorful and beautiful are exactly what attract danger. The parrot confesses that it's actually miserable, living in constant paralyzing fear that someone is going to capture it and lock it up in a cage. And then, the parrot points the crow to someone even more colorful, the peacock. Let's move right into section 3, the price of perfection. This is where we reach the climax of our fable, and the crow finally tracks down what is supposedly the most perfect bird of all. The crow searches and finally finds the peacock. But, well, not out in the wild. He finds him locked in a cage at a zoo.
The crow just sits there watching in awe as literally hundreds of people gather in this massive crowd just to admire the peacock's stunning beauty. The crow thinks back to his own life, how people literally shoo him away the second they see him, and he contrasts it with this crazy scene of absolute adoration. So when the crowds finally leave for the day, the crow approaches the peacock, 100% convinced he has finally found the happiest bird on the planet. But it's here that the crucial point is revealed. We can call this the peacock's curse. The peacock explains that he too used to think he was the most beautiful and happy bird on the planet, but it turns out his ultimate beauty is the exact cause of his miserable entrapment. Because he is so beautiful, he's locked inside a zoo for everyone to gawk at. Worse than that, he tells the crow that it physically hurts when people pluck his colorful feathers to make decorative things. His perceived perfection is actually the source of his daily suffering and his complete loss of freedom.
And then, the peacock delivers this massive twist revelation to our miserable crow. The peacock says, "I have examined this zoo very carefully, and I've realized that you, the crow, are the only bird not kept in a cage." Think about it. People don't try to catch crows. They don't trap them. The peacock admits that for days, he's actually been wishing that he were a crow because a crow can just happily and freely roam everywhere. The most invited, beautiful creature in the zoo actually spends his days wishing he had the unglamorous everyday freedom of the crow. Incredible, right? Let's shift into our final section, Section 4, Breaking the Comparison Cycle. It's time to apply this powerful lesson from the fable to our real everyday lives.
So after hearing this from the peacock, the crow flies right back to the monk, entirely transformed, but, not physically, mentally. For the very first time, the crow is actually happy just to be a crow. He tells the monk, "I don't want to be anything else. I'm fine as I am." He finally realizes that his ordinary life, the exact one he spent so much time crying about, actually contained this immense value. He had the freedom to live without being hunted or caged. He found total peace simply by accepting himself.
Our source material breaks down exactly why this happened to the crow, and honestly, why it happens to us, defining it as a vicious cycle of unhappiness. Basically, this is that persistent sadness and the habit of cursing yourself that stems directly from making unnecessary comparisons with others. When you are constantly looking at what you don't have, you inevitably destroy your ability to appreciate what you do have. You enter this mental prison of your own making, totally blinding yourself to your own unique advantages. It's just like scrolling through social media today, right? When we fixate on the curated highlight reels of others, the swan's pristine feathers or the peacock's adoring fans, we completely miss the freedom and beauty inherent in our own messy, unedited lives. This upward comparison is quite literally the very mechanism that manufactures our personal misery. Let's look at the ultimate takeaways here about the reality of the world we live in. First up, no matter who you are, there will always be someone who has more than you. Period. But secondly, there will always be someone who has less than you. Because of this endless spectrum, satisfaction just cannot be a destination you reach by outcompeting everyone else. A person who is genuinely satisfied with what they have right now is without a doubt the happiest. Conversely, if you make comparison a habit, it practically guarantees you will be the saddest, simply because there is always going to be a brighter parrot or a more adored peacock somewhere down the line. I want to wrap up this explainer by turning the mirror back onto you with this final provocative question. Whose feathers have you been envying without seeing their cage? Think back to that person you pictured at the very beginning of this explainer. You might be coveting their success, their wealth, or their beauty. But what hidden traps, fears, or physical and mental burdens are they secretly enduring just to maintain it? True happiness isn't found by swapping your life for someone else's. It's found by breaking the cycle of comparison entirely and learning to be fully satisfied with the beautiful freedom of being exactly who you are.